Right. Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to 30 Days to Duke Day 7, 8? 7, woo! And we will be having a talk today with the author of our summer reading book, The Prince of Los Cucuyos. Mr. Richard Blanco is joining us for this conversation. Thank you so much, Mr. Blanco, for joining us today. We'll be asking you some questions and also potentially taking questions from incoming first years. So I am Ibanka. I just graduated from Duke this past May, double majored in economics and literature, and I've been on the summer reading committee for 4 years.
And I'm Colleen Scott. I work with a women's leadership program at Duke called Baldwin Scholars, and I'm also on the committee with Ibanka.
So a little bit about our process. Every year we take nominations from people around the Duke community. So this year we had a little bit over 150 nominations. And then throughout the year, we, as a committee of about 15 members, go through the books. And then in March, we make our final decision. So we're delighted. Both Colleen and I really rallied for The Prince to be the book this year. So we're really excited that it was possible. And we're looking forward to welcoming Mr. Blanco on campus during orientation week. So we'll kick it off with questions. Colleen, do you want to go first?
Sure. Mr. Blanco, tell us why you think this book would be a good read for students entering college.
Well, I think it's, first of all, the narrator's age, as the book ends, is right at the threshold moment of graduating from high school and entering into college, which is such a complex time. And it's just sort of, you hit this peak in high school, and then there's this great sense of accomplishment, and then moving forward to the next day. So it ends right actually where they are. So that's part of why I kind of, when I wrote the book and finished it, I thought this would be a great read for students when they first enter college, because you're sort of still processing everything that happened in high school. And it's a coming of age book, so it's right at that moment, and so there's where you answer a lot of questions for yourself. You've been through a few things, but then a whole new set of questions come up. So I think psychologically that's what the narrator is going through, and so the book is from age 7 to 17, and dealing with all sorts of issues, mostly sort of connected, of course, to cultural identity, but also sexuality, and also sort of what I call artistic identity, which was sort of at that age you're sort of thinking about what you're going to be or do the rest of your life, so to speak. And so I wanted to sort of see where those three things intersected in the process of becoming. And so yeah, I just thought I really have always felt that. So I'm glad the book was picked, as this is the perfect audience, I think.
I certainly agree. Yes. Kind of related to that question is, what was the process like for you in reflection while you were writing The Prince, and how do you think, thinking about your past and reflecting could be useful for freshmen as they might be like excited to close a previous chapter and start a new one?
Yeah, the process, this is my first memoir, so I had to sort of teach myself a little bit how to write prose. Being a poet after 3 books of poetry kind of set in. And it was really just the art of learning the art of storytelling, even though poems can be narrative, and my poems are narrative. Poems aren't dependent on plot. They're not dependent on what happens next. And so I really had a great time sort of going back through my life and figuring out those stories, right? Not just little snippets, but really figuring out the long arc. And really, I just entered it with just great creative curiosity and fun, and sort of just wanting to explore, and sort of, as writing is an iterative process, you write a little bit, it tells you what's going on, you write some more things come into play. But as I was writing the pieces, the chapters, I realized that I tripped into or stumbled upon the 3 things again that I just mentioned that I felt were important, particularly to my life, but we're also universal. That sense of, one is sexuality, that sense of cultural identity or belonging, that sense of home. And then the other thing is sort of, that sort of artistic identity or career identity versus my engineer side versus my poet side. And so I imagined each piece and the chapters are quite long. They're almost, the smallest one I think is like 10,000 words long. And imagine each one, to be honest with you, like an episode out of I Love Lucy, in a sense that I wanted each chapter to sort of be able to tell, to be episodical, to be able, if that's a word, to be able to tell one story, that you could read one chapter and sort of get something out of it. It has its own arc. And, you know, the hardest thing about writing memoir, and you say use the word reflect, but it's not so much reflecting as sort of just storytelling, because the hardest thing about memoir and the tendency in memoir is that you're looking at something as an adult, but really it's about stepping into the psychology and telling the story of how little Ricky, as I call myself in the book, how he felt at that moment, not necessarily how I feel about it now as an adult. In other words, going through with him in that process, which is sort of something out of more borrowed from fiction technique, from narrative techniques in fiction. It's like stay in the story, because of course I know what my life means, right? Sorry. So it's really just important to stay in that moment and relive some of those moments. One in particular, which was the death of my friend Julio, was that I realized I really hadn't mourned his death. I mean, when someone close to you dies at 15, you know, I really realized I hadn't processed that, and that was an important chapter. Another important chapter was the one of my romance with my 80-year-old Jewish grandmother. As a 7-year-old, my little, yeah, it's not quite a bromance, but something like that, a friendly romance of how everything that she teaches me. And that's someone that I thought I had forgotten out of my life. And so it was just building these moments out of these snippets of memories and weaving them together.
What's the recipe for a good story?
Well, I think, you know, following the classic, you know, idea of that there's I think of sort of narrative techniques, which is sort of something that being a poet, I had to read up on, because you know, poems don't work on the same thing, as I said. But one of the most important things is to ask, and I think makes a good story, is well, your main character. In the case of a memoir, the main character is typically you as the narrator. But important question, what does the character want? What does the main character want? How is he going to get it? Who helps him get that or not? Who opposes him, who helps him, in my case, and who opposes him. And that's really the model for, I think, for storytelling for ages and ages, right? Of course, we complicate that and sort of we set it in a different context and put different window dressing around it. In the case of the memoir, it's that basic question: what does Ricky want? I mean, it's really universal. Is little Ricky wants to become, he wants to belong, you know, and in that sense, you don't have to necessarily be Cuban American or gay or anything like that. That yearning to that coming of age is something that's a universal desire. In my case, it's framed around that part of the belonging has a cultural aspect to it. I want to be Mr. Little Peter Brady. I want to be a little American boy, but I'm also a little Cuban boy, and I wonder what that means. I'm also sort of a little gay boy, and I'm not sure what that means either. So the particulars around that desire sort of change, but it's still the same desire. So in my case, the main antagonist, as some of you may know, is my grandmother, who opposes my being constantly, right? Who's the one, but at the same time, she's the one who forces me to or I should say, the one I work toward fulfilling that desire. So I think that's the important thing. And sometimes you don't get what you want, and that's one kind of story. And then the other story is the one where the main character gets what they want, and what does that mean? And following that classic idea, sort of that at the climax, that everybody's life, sort of every character's life changes, right? In my memoir, that moment comes right in the last page. And I won't give it away for those that haven't read it, but you know that from that moment forward, little Ricky's life is going to be different. His grandmother's life is going to be different. The mother's life is going to be different. You know, I think it's a threshold moment for the entire family. both in my experience and many of the students at Duke, it's a big transformation for everybody. Everybody's life changes. And by that, I don't mean some grand, like, whoa, like change, but just a change in psychology, a change in psyche. And so I think that's the classic. I mean, we mess with those, we fracture narratives and stuff like that. But I think that's what makes a great story. And one that, being Cuban, that entertains. One thing that I'm very proud about my memoir is that that it's funny at parts and very heartwarming and very sad at times. But one of the greatest compliments a reader gave me said, she said, this is the first memoir I read that I feel I didn't have to go back on Prozac. So, that was nice. I want, humor is one of the things that is easy to forget, and how much truth humor brings to us, right? Humor is a really unique human characteristic, and I'm no animal behaviorist, but it's really, cats and dogs don't laugh. We might have equivalents of things that they do that sort of are equivalents in instinctual behaviors that but humor is such an amazing, powerful tool. And being Cuban, that's so much part of our life, right? That tragic comic sense of life.
So my next question goes back sort of to your relationship with your grandma. So as students are coming to Duke, I hear myself repeating, but as students are coming to Duke in the next few months, in the next few years, they might be exploring different parts of their identity, realizing that their opinions and their ideals in some ways might differ from what they've been raised with. So to what extent do you think students have the responsibility to sort of go back and educate their parents on how they might think differently from them? How does that relationship sort of look like? I know it's something that myself and a lot of my friends have sort of struggled with. So I'd love to hear, what advice or tips you might have for students that find themselves thinking differently from their parents.
Yeah, and I think it's important, especially in the cultural context, because I think we face more, not to speak for everybody, but we face sort of some traditional values that are held on to very strongly because they represent the culture and they represent the preservation of the culture and that identity. In writing the memoir, I think what I learned was that first you have to understand your story, right? First you have to you can't sort of immediately reject those given cultural values just because. I mean, we really, it's sort of the book, as I like to describe it, as a cultural coming of age story as well. And part of it is just really understanding, in my case, what were those values and where did they come from, right? Why is my grandmother this way? Why are my parents this way? So I think first it's important to have empathy and to understand where they're coming from. And then the other thing, I think it's really I think we have to challenge them, but I think to understand that in that challenge is where we grow, but it's not about winning the fight, so to speak. My grandmother's a perfect example. My grandmother, in a weird way, even though her sort of homophobia and her xenophobia sort of got in my way, they also made me work stronger. They also made me sort of become more introspective and ask bigger questions. And in part, my grandmother made me a writer. And if that's not necessarily in the memoir, but something I've realized as an adult, that because of that conflict is where I came to writing. So I would also say that, that challenge, remember that challenge comes with some great lessons, and that there's something to be learned. And again, it's not about winning the fight per se, but it's about having a conversation. And with my grandmother in particular, I realized, listen, my grandmother's giving me my grandmother. I'm not necessarily going to change her. But she did move a few inches, and my mother certainly has over the past few years. My grandmother died obviously many years ago. So yeah, to stay in there, but also realize it's about you. It's not about sort of needing that validation, because I think, as any psychologist would tell you, it's really ultimately about you. So ultimately about the fact that you are standing up for something, and that you're exploring something is the important part. But I wouldn't again, it's not about winning, duking it out. Sorry for the pun, but so I think, yeah, that's the important lesson, is that it's in the struggle that that we learn the most.
There are moments in the book where there's a quick flip between pride and shame. Can you talk about those two emotions as perhaps two sides of the same coin?
Do you remember some any particular scene, or I'm just thinking. I'm thinking of one, like when little Ricky's all excited, like, and then the grandmother comes in and does something, and then there's this
rug kit.
What's that?
The rug kit.
Oh, the latchhook rug kit. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of like we're talking about, that struggle, that tension between my grandmother and myself all the time about my sexuality, and also cross with the xenophobia. I think it's, I think it's just part of the story I wanted to write, was that I think that's very characteristic, is that gay child, right? The psychology of the gay child, that we suddenly have all this delight in these things we want to explore, and then we suddenly are confronted with they're not socially acceptable. Or I can't do a latchhook rug kit because I'm a boy, or I can't do certain things because I'm a boy, and in this case, I can't do certain things because I'm a Cuban little boy, right? And so there's always met with this shame for the things that you delight in, then it was a constant negotiation with my grandmother. It's like about my behavior, what I could do, what I couldn't do. But I found that was a particular psychology of growing up as a gay child, when you don't even know what gay means, which was very hard to write about, because Ricky has no language to describe this. There's no conscious language of, oh, I think I'm gay, or like there's just a sense of what I like is wrong. And that's the message that most gay kids get, and what they're interpreting is not just that what I like is wrong, is that who I am is wrong. And then this deep shame comes in. And I think, and not to stereotype or generalize, but I think a lot of our gay LGBT community, it's no miracle that they grow up to sort of do wondrous things in their lives because of that challenge, as I was saying, Ivanka, but also that in a way it's about overcoming that shame and sort of saying, no, these are overcoming shame into moments of living in pride, without fear, without shame.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So another question about your artistic identity. So I know a lot of students, similar to you, might be told by their parents, like, you must study this, like this is a lucrative career. How did you push for your creative path, and how can you encourage students who might have like a deep passion or interest in something to push for that as well?
Sure. I think in my case, I think, and what the memoir sort of touches upon, I was limited in choices because of a cultural divide. One, my parents didn't even know who the Rolling Stones were or Robert Frost. They might have known some Cuban artists, but I didn't know them. So we never had that sort of window open, or that window of conversation. That was one. One, of course, was a socioeconomic reality, and the parents, immigrant parents, exile parents, that I think a lot of parents sort of uphold traditional sort of career choices: doctor, lawyer, engineer. And then there was also the dimension of homophobia. So, choosing to be an English major or a painter wasn't just about money. It was also I wanted to be an architect. My grandmother thought that was way too gay. It's like, she didn't talk to me for a week. So there was all those three things that I had to navigate around. I think again, I think we make our choices as best we can. I chose to study engineering, but I never let go of the creative dream. Again, I'm a freak. I'm a left brain, right brain guy. Like, I've loved everything. I still love everything. I mean, if I could go to law school now, I would. I'm a perpetual learner and a perpetual student. But I picked engineering because I actually did follow my parents' advice, and I was great at math and I loved math. So, but I never let go of that creative piece. And so I actually started writing poetry in my engineering office, because there was about 60% of my job, lo and behold, in my engineering consulting firm, was writing proposals, studies, letters, all sorts of oral and written communication skills on which my job depended on. And I really got into language and sort of really realizing what language was, tone and diction and audience, and actually excelled in my job because of my writing. And it's so important. I just a little plug here for writing. You know, writing is so essential to almost any career. Anyway, that's how I stumbled, and then my creative side came on. That was sort of dormant, but it was there. And I said, what else can we do with this writing thing? I think, what's the weirdest thing we can do? Like, let's write poetry. And what I say to students sometimes is that, look, life is long, and have a plan. I mean, have a sort of a sketch out a plan. You can do everything. You can do both if you want, you know, or pick a career. Like most students like yourself, Ivanka, are dual majors now, or triple majors from what I've seen. I mean, they're studying like Chinese and engineering, you know, things that really weren't even possibilities when I was growing up. It was like one career. So I went back to school and I got my master's degree in creative writing. But I also learned that all knowledge is connected. And that, you know, in some ways, everything that you learn, I mean, yes, there at some point there's a lead horse and something that's what you do, but everything that you learn in life sort of comes back to inform you, and actually is what makes you a breakthrough person when you synthesize pieces of knowledge rather than just pulling them apart. Certainly, even for engineering, that was the success. That was sort of a part of the success, was to be able to deal with communities and deal with town meetings, deal with humans, you know. And the engineer that didn't quite learn that sort of stayed behind. So in a way, as I always say, my engineering and my math classes actually helped me a lot with poetry, because the idea of language is so much about logic and structure and then breaking that logic. So my math classes actually helped me a lot with poetry, and my poetry in the end helped me a lot with that human that human dimension of engineering that we're not taught in Calculus 5, how to deal with the town meeting, right? So as I always say, I'm a better engineer because I'm a poet, and I'm a better poet because I'm an engineer. So I would just say, you know, point in a general direction, realize that life is full of possibilities and you don't have to do them all at once, but have a plan. And whatever it is that you end up really liking, point everything in your life to support that. So at the end of the day, in my engineering office, I had to earn a living as an engineer because there was no money in poetry. There is no money in poetry. But I set it up. I earned my keep with my firm. And I said, listen, I want to work 30 hours a week. I want to get paid by the hour. I don't, you know, they all knew I was a poet. They would go to the engineers would go to my poetry readings. And it was great. Like, we had an understanding, but because you can't let go of, you know, I think it's so easy to let go of those dreams because you're saying, oh, I'm going to do this, which is practical and might not be a bad idea. I mean, I believe in practicality as an engineer as well. But the important thing is not to let go of those other things, to be always remembering that you're a perpetual learner in life and never sort of, you know, never give up on those. I wonder what poetry, remember that poetry that I wanted to write one time. I think that's the most important thing.
How would you say you've disturbed the universe?
How do I disturb the universe?
Mm-hmm.
By being a poet and engineer. That was a little bit of a disturbance. It's come together in the last couple of years where those worlds finally make sense in terms of career as well as stuff. How do I disturb the universe? I disturb the universe by writing also. I mean, I think writing is an investigation. Writing, every time I write a poem, I feel I learned something new about myself, about the world, about my family, about a memory, about something. And so I constantly disturb the universe because I just don't accept anything at face value. And my life is a constant process of examination, of deep noticing and wondering. I challenge the universe by never forgetting to be a child, which is in a way why the memoir is so important to me, because our childhoods are the groundwork for so much. And basically, I want to say everything in our life happens in that time span. Everything that we are and will become happens in that lifetime. And so to just always sort of keep looking at the world and observing it as a child, with the curiosity of a child, with the precociousness of a child, and not just sort of idly stand by and let life happen to you. Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think I'm still disturbing the universe. Disturbing a lot of things. I'm disturbing the cats, the dog. I disturb everything.
Okay, so we have 5 more minutes left, so I think we can do a couple more questions. So my next question is, the summer reading committee likes to choose books that express perspectives that a lot of students may not have been able to read before. So for people like me, that feels like, wow, I have something I can relate to. We're talking about, these marginalized identities that you don't always read in like your AP Lit class. But for some students, like they might not relate to anything in the book, right? So what do you hope like people can learn if they're coming from, say, a traditional conservative background? They're like white male. Like, what do they have to learn from this book? What lessons can they take away?
Sure. Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think that it's important for these voices to be out there. I know that my first sort of mentor from afar and ended up becoming great friends with was Sandra Cisneros, and House on Mango Street gave me permission to write my story. Before then I was writing about daffodils and like all these things from like dead white British poets, and I was writing about daffodils in Miami. There are none. Like, right. So it's important to open that door of that window to see yourself in that work. So that's one important thing. However, it's a little, for me, it's a lot more complex than that, because, and I look at it this way: no matter what, everything, at least I strive my work to be universal, and it's sort of like saying, well, let's pick Robert. I can only relate to Robert Frost if I'm from New England, right? And so this is a weird prejudice we have. In terms of people that think this is someone else's story. No, it's their story too. Everybody goes through these emotional, negotiations in their family. Yes, the window dressing changes, but if you look real deep, it's the same thing. The family dynamics, the all these roadblocks in your life, the family love, the family turmoil, these are universal things. Like I always say, like Cubans are not the only ones who have a dysfunctional Thanksgiving, folks. Like this is a universal American experience, right? And what we do as storytellers is we have to add details to those stories to make, we have to have a movie that shows a story. So we're telling our story, but really the foundational stuff is universal. If you really think about it, we've been writing this, the perennial themes of literature. It doesn't matter what culture you're sort of picking it up on. It is there. I mean, West Side Story is Romeo and Juliet, retold all over again. So I think it's important for the other readers that they realize and are given permission to say, you know what, this is your story too. Not only is it your story, this is a story of America that's happening right across your street in the corner. And it's you. It's just, it's no different than you. It's just, the window dressing changes, that's all. So really the lessons and the universal content are there. And that happens to me. For example, one of my greatest influences is Elizabeth Bishop as a poet. And I think people think that, when they ask me who are your greatest influences, I'll mouth off every Latino poet in the world. And the reality is that there is something very interesting when you see yourself in something that you don't expect to see yourself in. And that is almost twice as powerful, because what that says to you, at least as a writer, what that says to me is, if I can connect with Elizabeth Bishop, with her blue hair, born in Worcester, however you spell her, say Worcester, Massachusetts, that means that theoretically she could connect to my story, right? That it's a two-way street. So I think it's important for them to give themselves permission and not realize and not be like, oh, this is just a Latino story, or even present it as just a Latino story. Like I say, when I teach Latino literature, I tell them we have to call it Latino literature now, but it's really American literature for, right? That's really what it is. So I think that's important for them to realize it's their story. A lot of times at readings, students, adults will come up to me and say, I love the memoir, your reading of the memoir was so funny, it was so touching and stuff. And then they'll buy like 3 copies of the book. And then one will be for a Cuban neighbor's daughter. One will be for some other Latino that they know. And it's weird. They feel like they just told me they love the story and they feel like they don't have permission to own it. You know, like it's such a weird thing, and they bring like 3 copies of the book, but not one for themselves. I'm talking about sort of the you know, the sort of the stereotypic, not stereotypic, the kind of demographic that you described. And here they were just enjoying this, right? So I think it's important to tell those students, look, this is not just about being Latino. This is about being a human being first. But it's a story. We don't say that about white authors, right? Well, this is about being a New Englander, right? Or this is about being in, you know, so yeah, I think it's important to give a little empathy and also sort of hold their feet to the fire at the same time, in a way.
Thank you.
Yes.
So a question came in from one of our students who was tuning in. Genesis asked, in the end, you write about finally arriving to Cuba. Did you get to see all the places your family always talked about, and what was that like?
Oh, right at the end, yeah. Yeah, the end is a sort of a kind of time warp where I tell you everything that's going to happen in my life in the next in 2 pages for the next 40 years. Very poetic moment, actually. So yes, I did. I've gone. Actually, I just got back from Cuba 3 days ago. So I've gone to Cuba several times. I've gotten to see. I mean, you can imagine. It was all these sort of this little, the imaginary world of the memoir where little Ricky has always grown up with this sort of imagined Cuba, all that coming to life in physical reality, like the house where my grandfather lived, you know, the palm tree, my mother, there's just beautiful pictures of my mother under this beautiful palm tree, like all when she was hot, when she was young, and her little shin pants. I got to take a picture under that palm tree when I was 20 something. So yeah, it's still magical. I still stumble into that story, and it's different because, you know, it's one thing when it's your imagination, it's another thing when it's a physical reality. But yes, I did luckily get to encounter that, and I'm still encountering a lot of that. I'm doing most of my work now with actually other Cuban American youths with a program called Cuba One, the Cuba One Foundation. And what we do is take Cuban Americans, sort of now 2nd generation Cuban Americans that are a little sort of detached from their roots or haven't had the opportunity to go to Cuba or don't really even know how to do that. There's one participant was from Hawaii, one was from Alaska. So we take them sort of, it's a birthright trip, and we take them and we're their sort of mentors in showing them the Cuba that was shown to us by our parents. And so try to sort of pass that forward because it's such a sense of completion. And as the cliche goes, and speaking in terms of universal content in a memoir, regardless of the details, as the cliche goes, you have to know where you're from in order to know where you're going. And getting back to your question, Colleen, why is this book important? Because we're at that moment in our lives as these students coming into college, into university, where we really need to start thinking about where we're from, so that, because we're really going to have to be moving forward very quickly. And it's no coincidence that happened that happens almost for everybody right around that age. And so it's important to investigate that story, to realize your parents aren't, and their stories aren't some old tacky stuff that they're talking about, some place that, you know, that they're not just stuffy. Getting back to your question, Blanco, about traditional values, you know, investigating that, learning that, and really learning that, and then be able to challenge it. So at the end, it all comes down to that cliche in a way.
Any other questions? Well, I think we need to wrap up, but thank you so much for the conversation today. It was delightful, and we can't wait to meet you in August.
Great. It was great for me too. I can't wait to be there in person and live, come to life. I love reading. I love reading. I love connecting with students. I love them to tell them when they start telling me their stories. So hopefully this story will generate their own thinking about their own story, and we'll connect on that bridge of art that sort of is cross-cultural, cross-gender, cross everything, right? That sense of being human beings, right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.